After Bitcoin broke out to new all-time highs earlier this year, the market has since experienced a multi-month choppy drawdown period, leading investors to begin questioning whether this bull cycle may already be over. Here, we'll uncover the data to see if this is really the case. Today, we're going to be looking to see whether the Bitcoin bull cycle is already over, and where better to start than the MVRV Z-score chart we have here on BitcoinMagazinePro.com. And as we can see, we've actually seen quite a sustained period of downwards movement in this data point, maybe suggesting that our upside trajectory may have already ended. But immediately what we can see from previous cycles, I mean, the 2019 might have been a bit of an anomaly given the COVID 2020 dump, but even back here in 2016 and in 2017, we had these huge negative periods where the MVRV Z-score dropped very dramatically during a bull cycle. I don't think during this period of price action, many people would have argued that this wasn't a bull cycle, but I think just because we've had, well, multiple months of price action being pretty boring, very much sideways, very choppy, while this has decreased, has maybe given people a little bit of an indication that the bull cycle may already be over. And especially we look at something like the MVRV momentum indicator, which is taking the raw MVRV data and applying a moving average to this, so we can almost differentiate bull cycle to bear cycle based on whether we're above or beneath this moving average. We can see that we've actually dipped beneath this moving average, and it's actually turned red on this lower, almost colored oscillator here, indicating that this might look a bit like a bear cycle. But again, all we need to do is zoom out, look to the previous few cycles for inspiration. And again, if we zoom in here, we can see when Bitcoin's price was around $4, $5, all the way down to $3,000, we had these red indications as the MVRV data point moved below its moving averages before we rallied up to $20,000. So I think just because we're seeing one metric in isolation, or maybe just a couple metrics in isolation, showing slightly more bearishly looking outlooks, I don't think we really need to assume that the bull cycle is over. Again, in 2019, we had this very extended period beneath this, at which point, as price dropped from around $14,000 to $3,000, obviously that wasn't peak bull cycle times, but just following this period, price then ran up to a new all-time high above $60,000. So again, I think as long as we don't see a sustained period of time beneath this metric, as long as it's just a temporary dip like we've seen historically in the past on multiple different occasions, then I don't think it's anything to necessarily worry about. Especially the short-term hold at realized price is looking very similar to that actually, as this is almost like a moving level of support and resistance. Given Bitcoin's price action, the average accumulation cost of new market participants, we can see that on average they've paid about $63,000, nearly $64,000 for their Bitcoin, and we're actually slightly beneath this, indicating that a majority of new market participants are actually at a loss on their position. But again, this isn't necessarily something we need to be worried about. We can see throughout this current cycle, we've already had multiple instances where we spent a few weeks, maybe even a couple months beneath this line. And during previous bull cycles, again, we had multiple instances where price would dip beneath this line. And if anything, this was an amazing opportunity to accumulate some more discounted BTC before the bull run really kicked off. Now, of course, we do have to acknowledge that maybe we have already set a new all-time high. Anything is possible. But if we look at something like the spent output profit ratio, this really isn't showing many investors are worried and scared and capitulating and selling their positions at losses. Obviously, we're seeing a little bit of sell loss on this metric. If we actually scroll down here, it'll go into the calculation method here. But just to very simplify what this method is doing, it is looking at the price at which Bitcoin was purchased and moved to one wallet. And then we can track when it was next moved to see if that transaction was at a dollar profit or a dollar loss. So if this is beneath zero, indicates that majority of Bitcoin was actually moved for a loss on that day. But usually these occur right at major turning points in a market, especially when we're during a bull cycle. If we just look to the run up after the COVID 2020 dump, we had multiple instances where this gave us a majority of losses on one day of price action or a few consecutive days of price action. But again, these were really just golden opportunities to accumulate more. And the big difference between when we see potentially bull market accumulation opportunities and the early indications of a bear cycle is just how long and sustained these losses are. Even just shortly after our previous all-time high at above $64,000, it was only a few days later and a few percentage drawdown before we see massive amounts of losses and capitulation for multiple years after that. So the fact we've only really seen a couple instances, a few days where we've seen positions being sold at a loss gives us a little bit of optimism that definitely this bull cycle isn't over. And I think something that maybe people need to consider a bit more is there's been this theory of diminishing returns over this past few cycles where each single cycle has a lower percentage gain than the previous. If we just isolate, we can see that compared to the first cycle we had, the Genesis to 2011, obviously we're substantially behind that. And then the 2011 to 2015 cycle, we're obviously massively underperforming that. But we're actually still outperforming both the 2015 to 2018 cycle and the 2018 to 2022. And we could see there were periods during the previous cycle where these would maybe have one outperforming slightly better than the other. The peaks were obviously very different, but if we just again load up our current cycle, we've been outperforming both of these previous bull markets by double-digit percentages, triple-digit percentages for multiple months now, which really gives us some indication that maybe we've got a little bit ahead of ourselves in this cycle. We've already broken our previous all-time high considerably earlier than we have done in any previous cycle, and especially post-halving and post-ETF hype when lots of new capitals were inflowing and maybe miners have been capitulating a little bit. I think just a cool-off period was probably necessary, and the fact that we're not seeing a huge amount of capitulation among long-term investors gives us, again, a little bit more confidence that the bull cycle isn't over. This is just a little bit of a temporary pause, and especially as we were discussing with the miners, we've recently seen a hash ribbons buy signal. We can see as the background on this chart turned from red to white, indicating that the 30-day or about 1 month moving average of the Bitcoin hash rate crossed above the 60-day or about 2-month moving average. This has given us a very good indication that the next few weeks and months of Bitcoin price action should hopefully be a little bit more positive. But realistically, anytime we run up from $15,000 to $73,000 with only a few months of sideways price action and no real sustained period of drawdown, it's inevitable that the market is going to cool off a little bit. And as we've said, multiple metrics now pointing towards us potentially having some bullish reclaims of major levels such as the short-term holder realized price, the MVRV momentum indicator, and of course the hash ribbons, all giving us some confluence that maybe times are about to get a little bit better. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on BitcoinMagazinePro.com, your #1 source for Bitcoin analysis. So just to summarize, after months of sideways price action, the MVRV momentum indicator is potentially showing early indications of the Bitcoin bull cycle being over. However, this has happened during multiple previous bull cycles before Bitcoin went on to make 100 or 1000% gains. And just because we're seeing a little bit of a bearish period of price action doesn't necessarily mean that the bull cycle is over. We are still slightly beneath the short-term holder realized price, which is about $63,500. So I think if we can reclaim that as well as reclaim the MVRV momentum indicator, then that'll give us a much more bullish outlook for the coming weeks and months. And especially as we're not really seeing a lot of realized losses and capitulation on the spent output profit ratio, it's fair to assume that even though we have had a little bit more of a bearish period of price action, lots of investors are still not willing to sell. They don't think it's worth the opportunity cost of selling at a 20-30% drawdown period, when really the next few months and potentially years for Bitcoin are looking incredibly positive indeed. And especially alongside a Bitcoin hash ribbons buy signal for the first time since the Bitcoin halving event that just happened a few months ago, the outlook for the next few weeks and months is definitely going to be a bit more positive. And especially when we compare Bitcoin's price action to its previous bull cycles, we maybe have got a little bit ahead of ourselves this early on in the cycle. Really, when considering diminishing returns, even if we have a few more months, as painful as it might be, of sideways and potentially downwards price action, that wouldn't necessarily indicate that the bull market is over. We really need some more sustained negative periods of drawdown. We need to see people really selling at a loss and really just overall capitulation in the market, which right now we're not seeing. So until we see evidence otherwise, the bull market is definitely still on. If you like this video, then please visit BitcoinMagazinePro.com, where our analytics help you to make informed, data-driven decisions about Bitcoin. With over 150 live charts, personalized indicator alerts, in-depth crypto industry reports, API access, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Bitcoin bull cycle potentially being over. Are you like me and think that this is just a temporary blip before we have some more positive price action? Or do you maybe think that we have seen the all-time high for this cycle and we are due a more extended period of drawn-out bearish price action, potentially indicating a multi-year Bitcoin bear cycle? As I said, let me know in the comments below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.